tonight, immigration from fear to rational policy. And our speaker tonight is, of course, Sara Dady. This event is sponsored by, of course, Highland Community College, but more specifically, the Global Task Force here.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we need someone to fix the mic. Do I need to?
What's wrong? You can't hear me? You can't hear me?
Feedback. Just a second. Any of you guys know how to do that?
Definitely, that's fine. Let me turn those. This is better. Is this okay? Okay, we had two microphones on, I guess. Wow. Okay. How many Highland instructors does it take to change a light bulb? I guess. Anyway, Sara Dady is our speaker tonight. She's going to be speaking on immigration from fear to rational policy. She was born in Michigan, and she's been a Rockford native since age 2. She's a 4-H alum, and she's volunteered for the University of Illinois Extension for many years. That includes Stevenson County, by the way. And she's also active at the Winnebago County Fair. She has a BA degree from Luther College in Classical Studies, and a JD degree from William Mitchell School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. And she's been practicing immigration law for 15 years. She is a board member of Justice for Our Neighbors of Northern Illinois, which provides free legal service for immigrants and immigration issues. And she was also a candidate for Congress in the 16th Congressional District in 2018. By the way, just a note that after the program is, after Sara finishes speaking, there are 2 microphones here. So if you have questions, come to the microphones, and that's how we'll kind of conduct the Q&A afterwards. So please welcome Sara Dady.
Good evening, everyone. I am so pleased to be here, and I want to thank Highland Community College and the Global Task Force. I love it when people come out and educate themselves and participate and contribute. It's amazing. So thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. So I am an immigration attorney. I've been practicing for a long time. I do family-based immigration and deportation defense, primarily. What I like about this cartoon is it doesn't matter on which side of the immigration divide you're on, the ideological divide, it speaks to all of us. Whether you're upset about news of family separations and children being held in tent camps down on the southern border, or you feel like we're being completely overrun and our borders are completely out of control. Our reaction to fear is the same. And I think this cartoon sums it up. There's something definitely wrong with our immigration system, but a lot of times we don't even know where to begin talking about it. And you started today by coming here. But when we're afraid and when we disagree, let's start on the things we can agree on. I hope by the end of this presentation you will see that immigration should be one of the least controversial good governance issues that our nation faces. Okay, this is what I think we can all agree on, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, a conservative. The United States has an absolute right to control who crosses its borders. Second thing I think we can all agree on, there shouldn't be any undocumented people in the United States. Anyone who's living here should have followed a lawful process and have legal status. I think we can agree on that. There should be, therefore, a lawful process for all non-citizens to seek entry to the United States, either whether they're staying temporarily or permanently. There should be a lawful process. Now that doesn't mean that everyone gets approved at the end of it, but everyone should have a process to follow. Annual visa numbers should be based on actual U.S. economic need, family needs, and our humanitarian responsibilities. Individuals who pose a danger to the United States should not be granted entry to the United States. Individuals who have harmed the United States should be removed from the United States or deported. Individuals should not be denied entry solely because of their race, religion, color, national origin, sex, or other immutable characteristics. The majority of Americans agree with these statements. Unfortunately, we have a Congress that appears to be in a legislative paralysis, but these should not be controversial statements, and they're not. So let's see why we have such a controversy on immigration. Immigrants. There are too many coming in. It's an invasion. Immigrants bring disease. They're going to take American jobs. We're all going to starve. There's going to be poverty. They're all criminals. This cartoon is a poorhouse on a ship headed over from Galway, Ireland. So during the Irish migration, you can see what's written on it, poorhouse. That Ireland was just shipping all of their poor to the United States, and this was the argument that was made. Great Britain is still just sending us their poor. This cartoon is after the Chinese Exclusion Act, Uncle Sam's Farm in Danger. And these are locusts with the head of Chinese people. It's very scary. And then look, you have the specter of famine hovering above these locusts who are eating all of the food in the United States. And then this cartoon, the box that's dumping all of these suspicious-looking people into New York Harbor is labeled the slums of Europe daily, with all of the Southern European immigrants coming over at the turn of the last century. And then you even see behind Uncle Sam down, they have their bodies of rats, but the heads of these Southern European immigrants. Because rats are vermin, right? They're animals. And these cartoons are over a century ago, some 150 years ago. But this is a normal fear. When new people move into your community, you don't know who they are, they look weird, they speak a different language, they eat different food, there's always a fear response. And we seek safety. So we're triggered by fear that there are too many people coming in who are scary, they might hurt us. What do we do to protect ourselves? Let's build a wall. This is the Chinese wall around the United States of America. From 100 years ago, this is a political cartoon on how to solve the Chinese immigrant problem. Build a wall. But walls don't always have to be physical. We also try to use literacy tests as a way to build a wall to keep those uneducated, poverty-stricken masses from coming to U.S. shores. So literacy tests are also used as barriers. Okay, so let's talk about safety. We've heard in the news all the time how Customs and Border Protection needs help at our southern border. And so we have to send military reinforcements because Customs and Border Protection is completely overwhelmed. I think it would be helpful if we all understood exactly what this federal agency is and what it does every day. So Customs and Border Protection originally started out under the Department of Treasury because their job was to collect taxes on people coming to the United States when we were first founded as a nation. And those immigrants have paid for a lot of national projects in the United States over the years. So first, Customs and Border Protection, I'll call it CBP, started out in the Department of Treasury, and then when the United States entered into a period of immigration restrictionism, it was moved to the Department of Labor. because there was great fear that immigrants were taking American workers' jobs and we needed to protect American jobs. So it became less about collecting taxes and revenues and more about restricting immigration as a protectionist measure. Then, after World War II, when we signed on to international treaties to accept our responsibility to help resettle refugees, it moved from the Department of Labor under the Department of Justice, because then immigration was seen as a justice issue. Then in 2003, after the 9/11 attacks, and we created the Department of Homeland Security, immigration has been seen as a security issue, which is now why CBP is under the Department of Homeland Security along with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. CBP is responsible for patrolling our border and admitting people and goods into the United States. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is responsible for looking for people who are in violation of our immigration laws, making a civil administrative arrest, and referring them to the immigration court for deportation proceedings. So those are the two federal agencies that do immigration enforcement. CBP is the largest federal agency in our country. They have over 60,000 employees. They process 1.1 million travelers every day arriving at our ports of entry. They inspect over 300,000 vehicles, trains, ships, and I have trains twice. Airplanes should be on there, sorry. Airplanes every single day. They let into the United States 7.7 billion in goods every day. And they have criminal and civil law enforcement responsibilities. So 1.1 million travelers a day that they are processing. They can process a lot of people in a very short amount of time because that's their job and they're really good at it. On top of that, we have done nothing but increase funding for CBP from 5.9 million in 2004 to now it's 16 billion a year. So they're very well funded. Okay, but we've got this huge spike in people coming to our border, right? All these people coming up from Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua who are trying to get into our country, and it's a huge emergency, it's a huge crisis at the border. And you can see in February of this year, CBP has apprehended 76,000 people coming to our border. That sounds like a huge number. I mean, that sounds like a lot. But when you keep it in context, looking at it is an increase, that's true, but is it a crisis? Look at the numbers. We have not exceeded the averages for the last 4 years yet. And a lot of this is happening because they're not processing people through ports of entry, so then people feel like they have no choice but to cross illegally, cross the river, cross the desert. So a lot of this comes down to management of processing people at our border. Okay, fewer people today are attempting to enter the United States without inspection. We are at our lowest level since the late 1970s. The year that we had the most people enter without inspection to the United States, it was over 1.6 million, and that was in the year 2000. Every year since 2000, it has decreased. And you can also, the orange line here is the number of Customs and Border Patrol agents that have been increased since 1975. So we now have more than twice the number of Customs and Border Protection agents, exponential increase, than we had in 1975. And we're at 1975 levels at this point. So I think it's important that we have a broad view and context for what's happening at our border and entries without inspection. And again, Customs and Border Protection, they process 1.1 million people per day traveling to the United States. They can handle tens of thousands more people wanting to come in and make an application for asylum. They're fully capable, and we should be proud of them that they're fully capable, and they're very well funded to do their job. All right, so why don't people just come the right way? Why do we have all these people coming to the border with no visa, no papers? Why did they just walk into a U.S. consulate and apply for a visa? They just want to do it the wrong way, right? No. Okay, so are there right ways to come? Yes, there are. But as this federal judge observed, immigration laws bear a striking resemblance to King Minos's labyrinth in ancient Crete. The tax laws and the Immigration Nationality Acts are examples we have cited of Congress's ingenuity in passing statutes certain to accelerate the aging process of judges. When our Northern European ancestors arrived over a century ago, they didn't need immigration lawyers. But people need immigration lawyers today. And that's because we have a lot of immigration laws which often contradict each other and they set a lot of immigrants up for failure. So let's run through a brief history of the United States immigration laws. In 1790, we passed our very first one, which limited naturalization to free white citizens. And it excluded slaves and Asian immigrants. You will find a very long history of the United States not wanting Asians in the United States. Our very second immigration law authorized the president to deport aliens who posed a danger to the United States. We didn't do anything else on immigration until 1875. So from 1798 to 1875, if your ancestors immigrated, they didn't have to apply for a visa, they didn't have to pay a fee, they didn't have to prove that they didn't have a certain criminal record, that they didn't pose a danger to the United States. They got on the ship and came over. That's the way that it worked. And they also had to pay 50 cents. In 1875, then we started excluding people because, with this wave of immigrants coming over, and there was great fear that a lot of these Irish immigrants in particular were criminals. So we barred the admission of prostitutes and convicts. 1885, that's incorrect, it's 1882, typo, sorry. 1882, we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act because after the Chinese built the railroads, the 20,000 that we brought over to build the railroads under treaty with China, there was great fear that the Chinese population was depressing American worker wages, and there were concerns about racial purity. And these were arguments that were made not just on the House floor or the Senate floor in DC, they were being made in California's State House. These were arguments that were considered legitimate arguments. As a result, we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. So no Chinese citizen was allowed to immigrate to the United States under the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1917, we imposed a literacy test on immigrants, again, to try and stem the flow of all of these scary Southern European and Eastern European immigrants coming to our shores. And then it wasn't enough to bar just the Chinese. We also had Japanese coming over, and they looked very similar to Chinese. So we barred all Asian laborers in 1917. And this was a time of immigration restrictionists. 1919, there was great fear about communists and anarchists and other radicals coming in who threatened the United States. So we increased deportations, and we all but cut off immigration from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, and also most of Africa at this time. There were immigration bans in the early 1920s. 1921, The stated purpose of this law was to preserve Northern European immigrants as the majority of immigrants, and to do that they used the 1910 census. In 1924, they decided that the 1910 census didn't favor Northern European immigrants as much as the 1890 census did, so they changed the law to base a quota on 1890 census. This is to ensure that more Northern European immigrants were coming over than from anywhere else, especially Southern Europe or Africa or any other country. Then we entered into the Great Depression. That drastically reduced immigration, as what tends to happen. If there's fewer opportunities, people tend not to come to a place. So we dropped from about 236,000 immigrants arriving in 1929, and remember, millions came over in the decades prior to that, millions. In 1933, we dropped to 23,000. 1937 was also the greatest population growth slowdown that we've ever experienced until now. I don't know if most Americans know that, but our population growth has slowed drastically. 1943, all of our men were out fighting in World War II, and we had bullets that needed to be made, and we had jobs that had to be filled, and we didn't have enough women working to do it, so we entered into a treaty with Mexico that allowed Mexican citizens to travel freely across the border to come up and work, and they did. In 1952, after World War II, we ended that program and engaged in an operation of mass deportation of Mexicans that had stayed and settled in the United States. Unfortunately, a lot of those Latinos that we deported happened to be U.S. citizens, but since they looked Latino, they were caught up in that deportation program, which its official government title was Operation Wetback. All right, we were also at the height of the Cold War, so we felt these fears again. We limited immigration even further from the Eastern Hemisphere, but not the Western Hemisphere. We created a preference for skilled workers and relatives of U.S. citizens. We also heightened security and screening procedures to make sure none of those Soviets could make it through. 1965, this is the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, and these are the laws that we still have today. The INA are the laws that we're working with today. You'll see we've tinkered with them, but this is really the basis of U.S. immigration law. We eliminated, in 1965, the quotas that were set up in the 1920s to favor Northern Europeans overtly, but we set a maximum on annual visas, these are immigrant visas for green cards, of 300,000 worldwide, and then we further restricted that specifically for the Eastern Hemisphere. So only 20,000 of those 300,000 will go to the Eastern Hemisphere, those Asian countries. So even though we eliminated the Quotas Act, we still have it. The Brasiero program ended. All right, in 1980, we established our modern asylum system, the one that we still have today. I think it's important to note that asylum seekers are called asylum if they're inside the country where they're asking for asylum. They've come in regardless of their legal status or manner of entry. Refugees have been processed outside of the United States and determined that they qualify for asylum, and then they're resettled in a country like the United States. If they're coming from outside, they've already been adjudicated to be entitled to asylum because they've been persecuted or would be. They're called refugees. If someone is asking for asylum in the country where they intend to settle to be safe, they're called asylum seekers. All of these people coming from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, there is no refugee processing available to them outside of the United States. No one can walk into a U.S. embassy abroad and say, hey, I'm seeking asylum in the United States. We are not set up for that. It is not a service that's available. If you want to ask for asylum in the United States and there's no outside refugee processing available to you, your only option is to go to the United States border and ask for asylum. Now, you don't have to go to a port of entry. That's not required under our law. It doesn't matter under our law, no matter how you enter the United States, with inspection, without, across the desert, swimming, through a port of entry. If you're in the United States, you absolutely have the right to apply for asylum. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you have the right to make that application and have it heard by a neutral adjudicator, an immigration judge. All right, 1986, we had a huge number of undocumented workers, particularly in agriculture, huge number. The Bracero program had ended. You see how we limit the visas. We had a demand for workers. So if they got in, U.S. employers would hire them and they would work. And after a decade or two, they settled in, they had families, bought houses, had kids, but no way to apply for lawful status. So President Reagan said this is unacceptable. We are going to legalize all of the people who are here, and then we're going to set up a worker visa program. So that's great. That's what the amnesty is, when people talk about the amnesty. And then they talk about how the amnesty didn't work. It's not that the amnesty, the legalization didn't work. That worked beautifully. Congress never set up a real worker visa program. That's where the failure was, not in the legalization. In 1996, the United States passed the harshest immigration law we've ever had, and that was signed into law by President Clinton. It created mandatory immigration detention. It created the quota on mandatory immigration detention. It limited federal court review of immigration decisions. It limited relief from deportation, and it increased the reasons why people could be deported or denied visas in the first place. The obstacles that it set up for people to apply for lawful status, that's part of the reason why we're in the situation we are today. Okay, but so what is the right way to immigrate? Well, that depends. We use the word immigration or immigrant very generally, but under the law it has a very specific meaning. An immigrant is someone who has the intent to live and work permanently in the United States. So we have immigrant and non-immigrant visas. Non-immigrant visas are only for people who do not have the intent to live and work permanently in the United States. They're coming here for a specific reason, for a specific amount of time, not permanently. So student visas, tourist visas, worker visas, those are non-immigrant visas. Immigrant visas are the green card. That's what it means. If you're applying for a green card outside of the United States, it's called an immigrant visa. If you're applying for it inside the United States, it's called adjustment of status. Refugees and asylum seekers are not immigrants. Refugees and asylum seekers, under the law, they do not have the intent to live and work permanently in the United States. If they're granted asylum, they're granted asylum until country conditions change, or they choose to leave the United States. But after they have asylum status for 1 year in the United States, they can make an application for permanent residency. They can make an application to adjust their status. And this is really important because you cannot apply for U.S. citizenship until you first get a green card. You have to be a permanent resident before you can apply for U.S. citizenship. There's no such thing and no way under the law to jump from being undocumented to U.S. citizen. You can go from having no legal status to permanent resident, and then after typically 5 years, you can make an application for U.S. citizenship. All right, so we have all kinds of visas except some that we need. It's a two-step process to get a green card in the United States. All right, there are unlimited, for step number 1, you have to be eligible to apply for a visa, which means you need someone who can petition for you. There are many lines for a green card, but not everybody can get into a line. There's not a line for everybody. There are unlimited visa numbers available for immediate relatives of United States citizens. That would be parents of U.S. citizens, spouses of U.S. citizens, and unmarried children under the age of 21. But if I want to petition for my parent as a U.S. citizen, I have to prove that I'm at least 21 years old. Only 21-year-old children can petition for parents. Babies can't. Toddlers can't. You have to be 21. All right, if you are not the immediate relative of a United States citizen, then you better hope you fall into one of these categories. Because if you don't, there's no line for you. Okay, family sponsor categories. Number 1 is unmarried children of U.S. citizens. F2A is for spouses and unmarried children under the age of 21 of lawful permanent residents, people who already have green cards. The F2B category is for unmarried adult children of permanent residents. F3 is for married children of U.S. citizens, and F4 is for siblings of U.S. citizens. We limit annual visas to 226,000 per year. On top of that, we further limit those 226,000 visas to applicants who live in China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. So if I am a United States citizen and I want to file a petition for my 22-year-old daughter who lives in Mexico, I'm going to file that petition today asking for a visa number for her. I'm going to file it in 2019. Right now, at this moment, they are releasing visa numbers for petitions that were filed in August of 1997. August of 1997. That's how backlogged these lines are, even if you're lucky enough to be in a line. Now, let's say I have a green card. I have a green card and I want to petition for my husband, who's in Mexico, and our 2 children. I have one child who's 12, and I have another child who's 20, or even 19. I'm going to file my petition. And then if you look up here under Mexico, F2A, it's going to be about 2 years before there's a visa number available for my husband and my children to come join me in the United States. Now, my 12-year-old is fine. In 2 years, my 12-year-old is only going to be 14, still well under 21. But my 19-year-old is going to turn 21 in 2 years. And when my 19-year-old turns 21, she's going to fall out of the F2A category into the F2B category. And right now, they're releasing visa numbers for petitions filed in 1997. So it's going to be well over 30 years. It's because of these limitations and these long waits for visa numbers that families have chosen to cross the border without inspection or remain in the United States to wait for their visa number. Because what family wants to be separated or divided for decades? Okay, now employment, but we favor employment and workers. So we've got visa categories for employers to sponsor certain employees. These are not as backlogged as the family-based immigration. And you see the C means current. So there are visa numbers currently available in those categories. But I want to draw your attention to the 4th preference category. The 4th preference category is for religious workers, so people who are hired by churches. But also that category is for special immigrant juvenile visas. And that is for juveniles who are present in the United States, who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by one or both parents, they can apply for a visa that eventually would lead to a green card. Well, if you want to take a look at what we've decided to do on limiting visa numbers for that category for people from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. 2016, 3 years before a special immigrant juvenile visa would be available. So what's happened now, even though you might have a child here who's been abused, abandoned, or neglected by their parent who qualifies for that SIJS visa, there are no visa numbers available. So Immigration and Customs Enforcement is proceeding with deportation proceedings, even though there is an application that they would qualify for. The problem is there just aren't any. They've decided to not make visa numbers available for applicants from those 3 countries at this time. But you see, if you're coming from Europe or any other country, visa numbers are current. So if you've been abused, neglected, or abandoned by your parents, you better hope you're not from Central America, because the United States is not interested in helping you at this time. All right, so a visa number is available. Great. You stood in line, you waited 30 years for your visa number, now you're coming to the United States, no problem. Not so fast. Remember the second step? Getting a green card is 2 steps. Now you have to prove that you are eligible for that visa. That means you are admissible, which is the legal term for it, that you do not have certain immigration violations that will disqualify you from getting that visa and coming into the United States. Entering the United States without permission, without inspection, disqualifies you from an immigrant visa, unless you had a petition filed for you before April 30th, 2001, then you can pay a $1,000 penalty and have that violation forgiven. If you have been unlawfully present in the United States for more than 1 year, but you have to leave to go to your visa interview that you've been waiting 20 years to attend, you will be disqualified from getting an immigrant visa for 10 years if you leave to go to your visa interview, because you're gonna trigger the 10-year bar for being unlawfully present in the United States. So we've eliminated an incentive for people to obtain lawful status when they have a way to do it, and that violation was part of the expanded grounds from the 1996 law that President Clinton signed. All right, if you've been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, you are disqualified from an immigrant visa. Can anyone here tell me what a crime involving moral turpitude is? Yeah, the courts can't even tell you what it is. They look at each statute one at a time to decide whether it is or it isn't. Basically, any fraud or theft crime generally is a crime involving moral turpitude. However, use of a false ID is a crime involving moral turpitude and will disqualify you from an immigrant visa. If you've been living in the United States unlawfully, is there any reason why you might have a false ID at some point? Probably yes. Well, guess what? Now you're just disqualified from getting your green card. But a conviction for possession of a false ID, not use, that's a crime involving moral turpitude, but possession is not. Being convicted of felony possession of a fake ID will not disqualify you from a green card. Controlled substance offense. You got caught with less than 30 grams of marijuana, you are disqualified from getting an immigrant visa. Hey, but it was in Colorado. It's legal there, not under federal law, and that is still a controlled substance offense. So if you are not a United States citizen, I strongly encourage you not to smoke pot, even in Colorado. Multiple criminal convictions. If you've been sentenced to 5 years or more in prison, if you have been deported before from the United States, you are disqualified. False claim to citizenship. You run around telling people you're a U.S. citizen, you are permanently disqualified from getting a green card. We guard our citizenship jealously. Voting in the United States, if you register to vote, you're swearing under penalty of perjury that you are a United States citizen. So that's a false claim, and it's fraud, and you'll be permanently barred from getting a green card if you register to vote and you're not a citizen. If you vote, same thing. Public charge, this was part of the law in 1882 to keep, the poorhouses of Ireland coming over. Anyone who might become a public charge, who might become a burden and uptake public benefits is disqualified from getting a green card. So anyone who is coming over through family or employer-based methods has to prove that they will not become a public charge. Their petitioner has to sign a contract with the federal government that states if that immigrant goes on public benefits, the government can seek reimbursement from the sponsor. And that's been true since 1965. So anyone that says immigrants just come here to go on public benefits, well, one, they're not eligible until they've had a green card for 5 years. And two, if they do go on public benefits, there is a remedy to get reimbursement from their sponsor. All right, medical grounds. Every intending immigrant has to get a medical exam. They have to have their vaccinations. They have to prove that they don't have TB or an STD. They also have to show that they don't have a mental or physical disorder that's going to pose a danger to themselves, anyone else, or property in the United States. Immigrants who have committed immigration fraud, used a fake passport or visa to come into the United States, are disqualified. And if none of those reasons work, there's reasonable ground to believe an alien will engage in unlawful activity in the United States. That catch-all applies to pretty much anyone who's lived unlawfully in the United States at this point. In 14 years of practicing law, I have not seen this provision cited as many times as I have since 2016. Before that, I never saw this one. Now I see it all the time, as well as the public charge ground. All right, welcome to the United States, don't unpack. I tell my clients all the time, there's nothing less permanent than being a permanent resident of the United States. There are so many ways you can mess up. There are so many ways for a lawful permanent resident or people who are here on valid visas and in lawful status to end up with an immigration violation and put in removal proceedings. People who are convicted of an aggravated felony, that sounds right, but it's aggravated felony as defined by civil immigration law, not criminal law. There are misdemeanors that qualify as an aggravated felony under immigration law, but not under criminal law. A felony conviction for a crime involving moral turpitude committed within an immigrant's first 5 years of having a green card. That makes them deportable and subject to mandatory detention. 2 or more convictions for a crime involving moral turpitude. I see all the time permanent residents who have been permanent residents since the 70s, and they have 2 shoplifting offenses from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. They go to apply for citizenship now, their criminal record comes up, and now they're referred for deportation proceedings. 2 misdemeanor retail thefts make a permanent resident deportable. Controlled substance violation. This is the great thing about immigration law. So now that you got your green card, you decide to go to Colorado that way, and for a long weekend. And you come back and you forgot to empty your pockets, and so now you get an ordinance violation in the state of Illinois for possession of less than 30 grams of marijuana. But you have a green card, so you're good. They can't deport you. You're not going to get deported for that. But if you decide to leave and go to Canada to visit your grandma, you're now inadmissible. So you can leave, but now that you have that controlled substance offense, and it's an ordinance violation, now you can't get back in. If you present yourself at the border with your green card, you're going to be put in deportation proceedings and detained. So That's one of the many examples of the contradictions of our immigration laws. Registering to vote, I'm deeply concerned about the state of Illinois having automatic voter registration at the DMV. I think the more people that vote, the better, but I think they need to be citizens, permanent residents who go in to get a driver's license, people who are here on student visas. I'm deeply concerned that they're going to be accidentally registered to vote automatically by the state of Illinois. And you know what? The federal government doesn't care that the state of Illinois did it on accident. The alien's going to be held responsible for that voter registration, which is going to be deportation proceedings. Overstaying on non-immigrant visa. That will get you deported. But I came in legally. Well, you overstayed. So now you're in deportation. Permanent residents who leave the United States for more than 6 months at a time without permission are deemed to have abandoned their status. Working without authorization on a non-immigrant visa. People who come in on a student visa, with a few exceptions, are not authorized to work. People that come in on a tourist visa cannot work. That's a violation, and they will end up in deportation proceedings. All right, deportation. It's important to understand that deportation proceedings is a completely separate process from the criminal justice system. Completely separate. Immigration violations are civil offenses. So an ICE officer encounters someone on the street and says, "Hey, are you illegal?" And the person goes, "Yeah, I am, you caught me." They then have a civil arrest. They take them to immigration detention, which is civil detention. They question them. They serve them with a notice to appear or a warrant for their arrest, which is not signed by a judge because that's only happens in the criminal process, not a civil process. And then the alien can see an immigration judge. But there are limited due process rights in civil proceedings. When someone is arrested for a crime, do you have to have some evidence that a crime was committed? Yeah, you have to have probable cause, right? That's not the same standard in civil arrests. It's much lower. When you're arrested by a police officer, the full due process protections of our glorious Constitution come into play. That's not the case with civil. There's no right to a bond hearing in a civil detention scenario. Under the Constitution, if you're arrested and charged with a crime, everyone has the right to a bail hearing. That's a constitutional protection. The Attorney General may choose to detain any alien charged with an immigration violation. That's what the law is. The law says may choose to detain. That is a policy choice by the Attorney General. If someone is not subject to mandatory immigration detention because they've been convicted of an aggravated felony or one of the other crimes that amount to the immigration violation, then it's a policy decision. There is absolutely no reason for the United States to have tent cities along the border or private detention centers trying to come into Livingston County, Illinois, to house detainees who are not subject to mandatory detention. What should happen, and this is what happened, started under the end of Obama's first term after he deported 2 million people, more people than George W. Bush did in 8 years. ICE was under orders to prioritize aliens who pose a danger to the United States. Those who were subject to mandatory detention or had certain criminal convictions, people who had no criminal convictions or asylum seekers were released from detention to wait for their first immigration hearing. Released on their own recognizance. And they have families, they have sponsors. A lot of churches sponsor immigrants who are in removal proceedings and asylum seekers. And so there was no need for all of these detention facilities. But this administration has decided to detain everyone, and that's what's happening. Some immigrants are eligible for bond, not all. Bond can be denied by ICE to anyone. But an immigration judge can always review that and perhaps set bond. A bond can be set no less than $1,500, and it can be set higher than $50,000 now. And because this is a civil process, and it's a civil bond, you have to pay 100%. It's not criminal bond where you only have to pay 10%. It's civil. So if that immigration judge sets that bond at $50,000, that's what the individual has to post in order to get out of immigration detention. The ICE attorneys are employed by the Department of Homeland Security, and they prosecute the cases. They're the ones who make the arguments to the judge why these aliens should be deported. Aliens have the right to an attorney, but not a free one. When someone's arrested and charged with a crime, what happens if they can't afford a lawyer? That's right, a public defender. There is no public defender's office for immigration proceedings because it's not a criminal matter. Full due process protections do not apply. Does it make a difference having a lawyer? We'd like to say no, but it does. 49% of aliens with an attorney were actually granted relief from deportation. Those who did not have an attorney, only 15% were. It makes a huge difference because our immigration laws are complicated. Asylum laws are complicated. You cannot look at an asylum seeker or spend 2 minutes talking to them and determine if they have a valid claim for asylum or not. It's complex work and it requires legal expertise. Our government has an attorney working for our best interest in that courtroom. The immigration judge is not a federal Article 3 judge under the Constitution. The immigration judge is an employee of the Department of Justice because this is an administrative law court. It's not a real court under the judicial branch. The alien, unless they can afford an attorney or find a nonprofit legal service organization to represent them, has no lawyer. And this is also why we have 3-year-olds appearing in immigration court without a lawyer to defend themselves. All right, some people, just because they're put in deportation proceedings doesn't mean they're going to be deported. There is relief available to some people if they meet the requirements and can prove their case. Currently, we have a backlog of over 1 million deportation cases pending in the United States. Those are not all the asylum seekers at the border. In fact, it's almost none of them. It's a very small percentage. The majority of deportation cases that are pending are brought against people who have been living here for more than 20 years and have no lawful status, no way to apply for lawful status, and they have now come to the attention of immigration one way or another because ICE is under orders to detain and initiate proceedings against anyone that they encounter, whether they have a criminal record or not, whether they pose a danger to the United States or not. We're now averaging detention of over 4,000 people per night in the United States. In the Chicago Immigration Court, where I practice, there are over 23,000 cases currently pending, and there are only 10 judges. The average time waiting for the first hearing is over 1,100 days in the U.S. Detained cases are heard faster than that, but there's a backlog. People are in detention a long time if they can't bond out. The majority of aliens are currently unrepresented by an attorney. All right, but we just have to kick them out. We just have to kick people out. They shouldn't be here. They broke the law. They overstayed their visa. They entered without inspection. The quicker and harder, the better. And that was kicking out the alien reds. Deportation. Back to where they belong. All right, so we not only fund CBP over $6 billion a year, we have now increased ICE's funding for last year, increased to over $4.5 billion is what we spend on immigration and customs enforcement in the United States. And you can see the budget increases over the last 3 years. All right, so how much would it cost to deport 11 million people? Well, it costs about $10,000 per person for deportation proceedings. So if we want to deport about 11 million, and this is not including the lawful permanent residents and people who are here on other visas, who also have immigration violations that make them deportable. These are just about the 11 million undocumented. It's going to cost $114 billion and take more than 20 years. Even the American Action Forum, which is a very conservative organization, is alarmed by the idea of engaging in mass deportation, not just for the bare costs alone that taxpayers are going to have to pay, but also because they say real GDP would drop by nearly 1.6 trillion and shave 5.7% off of economic growth. And I think now in 2019, we cannot afford to lose any more economic growth. All right, so why are we even talking about mass deportation, deport them all? It's because we still have restrictionists in the United States. We have a long history of immigration restrictionism in this country. Sometimes we don't want to acknowledge it, many times we don't know our own history, but they're still with us. These three organizations are the ones that do a really good job of playing on fears. Invasion, poverty, disease. These people just want to go on public benefits. We can't afford this. We have our own problems. The Southern Poverty Law Center has identified them as hate groups. And I'm sad to say that they have done a really, really good job of mainstreaming their restrictionist arguments. NPR routinely has the executive director of Center for Immigration Studies on as a counter viewpoint. And I think it's important to acknowledge that going to a nativist organization for a counterpoint on immigration is like going to the KKK for a counterpoint on civil rights. That's what it is, and that's what we're doing every time we give one of these organizations a platform. Okay, unfortunately, they have found a very sympathetic ear in the White House. President Obama was awful on immigration his first term. He was terrible. He tore communities apart. He co-opted sheriff's departments and police departments to help round up undocumented immigrants. That's why he was able to deport 2 million in 2 years. But by the end of his second term, he had a change of heart on this. Maybe the cries of the community reached him, I don't know. But in 2012, he said, okay, look, we can't do this anymore. We're gonna focus on people who pose a danger to the US, and he made the priorities list. And we've been working with that since 2012. First thing President Trump did when he came in is he repealed the priority list and said, everyone's a priority. Anyone who's in violation of our immigration law is a priority for deportation. He is transforming U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which processes the applications for green cards and citizenship, into an extension of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. USCIS is completely fee-funded. No taxpayer dollars are appropriated for it. Tax dollars support ICE and CBP. But if someone is afraid to walk in and make an application for a green card because they think they're going to get arrested by ICE at USCIS, they're not going to go in. And that's what's going to happen, and that is already starting to happen. ICE is coming in and making arrests at those benefit application interviews. We've now started arresting victims of domestic violence who would qualify for visas and under the Violence Against Women Act. There are application processing delays. It's taking a year for citizenship applications to be processed. It used to be anywhere from 4 to 6 months. Applications are down, but processing times are getting longer. President Trump announced that he's closing all international operations for USCIS overseas. So that means people who are making applications overseas for relatives. These are enlisted U.S. service personnel who may have married abroad. They'll no longer have their petitions processed overseas. They'll have to come back to the U.S. and encounter these year-long processing delays stateside. President Trump announced he's taking $3 billion from the Department of State humanitarian aid, and this was even before he said he's cutting off the aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. He's taking $200 million from USCIS in order to hire more ICE agents. All right, today we have fewer immigrants as a percentage of the population than we did a century ago. It's about 12%. A century ago it was 15%. Of that 12%, only 3.5% are undocumented. But yet we seem to spend 90% of our time discussing immigration on just undocumented. But they are by far the smallest part of our immigrant population. If you encounter an immigrant, the odds are that they're here lawfully. We have 31 million foreign-born residents in the United States. More than half Silicon Valley startups had a founder who was foreign-born. Immigrants make up 50% of all U.S. engineers and scientists with PhDs. The United States is not graduating enough scientists and engineers yet. Immigrants are 30% more likely to start a small business than a native-born citizen. 16.7% of all business owners are immigrants, and they contribute $67 billion of $577 billion in U.S. business income. Here in Illinois, the foreign-born make up just over 14% of our population, about 1.8 million, and they make up 17.9% of our workforce. The Latino population has exploded from 1990 to today, where it's just over 16%. 48% of immigrants in Illinois are naturalized citizens, and they make up 12% of all registered voters in the state of Illinois. There are an additional 326,000 who are eligible to naturalize. It means they have their green cards, they meet the requirements, they can make an application for citizenship. They are now eligible. 89% of children with immigrant parents, the children themselves, are U.S. citizens. 92% of children in Latino families and 89% of children in Asian families. 1.6 million native-born citizens in Illinois have at least one immigrant parent. There's an estimated 450,000 undocumented immigrants living in the state of Illinois. The citizenship question should not be on the U.S. Census. A federal court recently stayed that. But if that citizenship question does go on the U.S. Census, that's going to hurt Illinois. Because I can guarantee you, people who are undocumented and the U.S. citizens that live with them and love them are not going to complete that census, which means our state population will be undercounted. We've already lost population. It's going to be undercounted. We will lose not just one congressional seat, but maybe 2 congressional seats. And it will affect our per capita federal funding. Illinois immigrants paid $9.8 billion in federal taxes and $5.2 billion in Illinois state taxes. DACA's, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the young people with the work permits, they paid $131 million in state and local taxes in Illinois. Undocumented immigrants paid $758 million in state and local taxes. And here, I know you can't really see it, it's blurry, but the Tax and Economic Policy Institute did a study of how much more in taxes undocumented immigrants would pay if they're able to obtain lawful status. And because if you're undocumented, you can't get a social security number. It makes it really hard to do things like start businesses. But if they could obtain lawful status, we would see their contributions go up $154 million a year in state and local tax payments. Can Illinois afford to lose a single dollar in tax revenue at this point? I can't remember. How well are we doing down in Springfield? Not great, I hear. All right, immigrants and Social Security. If you don't have a Social Security number, or you make one up, or you buy one, it's not yours, you're not eligible for public benefits in the United States. There are a couple of exceptions, but they're very small. But they pay in to Social Security, they sure do. That FICA is deducted from their paychecks, and their employer sends it to Social Security, and Social Security says, there's something funny about the Social Security number, we don't know who to give credit to, and they send a letter to the employer saying, hey, you better check that Social Security number, and the employer never does and is under no obligation to, and that money just keeps getting paid to Social Security, but not being credited to anyone, and that worker can never draw that benefit anyway, unless and until the day comes they become a permanent resident. So, in that way, Social Security has calculated that undocumented workers contribute about $13 billion per year into our Social Security trust fund. $13 billion a year. The head actuary of Social Security said, you could say legitimately that had we not received the contributions that we have had in the past from undocumented immigrants, that would of course diminish our ability to be paying benefits for as long as we now can. Immigrants do not take public benefits. Immigrants are paying for Americans and permanent residents to get public benefits. That is the system we currently have in the United States. Is it fair? No, but that is what our system is. Immigrants and crime. I like this quote. I read the Cato Institute a lot. They're a libertarian organization. They are spot on immigration. I disagree with them on probably 89% of everything else, but immigration, they're spot on, and they do not hesitate to take on the immigration restrictionists. A study came out talking about immigrants and criminality, and there's a quote here from Mark Krikorian, who is the executive director of Center for Immigration Studies, and even he admitted a lot of data does suggest immigrants are less likely to be involved in crime. That is what all of the data to date, all the studies state. Immigrants are not more likely to commit crimes than U.S. citizens. In fact, U.S. citizens are more likely to end up in prison than immigrants. And I'm also gratified that the majority of Americans have that idea. Only 17% of voters thought that illegal immigrants committed more crimes than native-born Americans, or though those voters just might have a very low opinion of their native-born neighbors. 72% of voters thought that illegal immigrants committed less crime. So, DACA. This is important for Illinois. We've got 32,000 DACAs living in the state of Illinois. DACA is not real legal status. President Obama started the DACA program as an exercise of his executive authority. He said, look, these people are deportable, but we now have a priority list. And these people, if they came in under the age of 16, they graduate from high school, they served in the military, they're in school, they don't have a certain criminal record, we have no interest in deporting them at this time. And while we are not deporting them at this time, they can get a work permit, which they can renew every 2 years. And they pay $495 every 2 years for this work permit while they are not being deported. President Trump terminated the DACA program, but the reason that he gave is that it was an unconstitutional exercise of his executive authority. And 2 federal courts said, that's the wrong reason, you can't terminate it for that reason, so people who have DACA can continue to renew it while this case winds its way through the federal courts. All Trump has to say is, I don't want DACA anymore. I'm the president. I don't want it. And it's gone. So far, he has failed to articulate that reason. Instead, he wants to argue that it was an unconstitutional use of executive authority. Well, that's fine, because as long as he continues to make that argument, DACA will continue to exist until there's a final resolution in the court. But DACA will go away. It is going to go away. We're going to have 32,000 people living in our state who are married to U.S. citizens, who have U.S. citizen children, who will be left with no work authorization and no protection from deportation. So we can add that 32,000 to the 23,000 cases that are currently pending. So what's the solution? We have to identify the correct problem on immigration. We want to prevent undocumented immigration while meeting U.S. economic, family, and humanitarian needs. So what do we need to do? We need a broad legalization program to clear out and legalize the individuals who are already here and fully integrating to our communities. That will also, at the same time, clear out the million-case backlog in our immigration courts. If even 60% of those people who are currently in deportation proceedings would qualify under a broad legalization program, those cases are cleared out immediately. We should use civil detention sparingly, not just for immigrants, for everyone, in every case. Civil detention carries fewer due process protections. That should be a general rule. Plus, it's way cheaper to release people on bond than keep them housed in private detention centers. We need to make the immigration courts an Article I specialty court, like bankruptcy courts are under the judicial branch. We need to hire more immigration judges. We've got lots of ICE agents, we have lots of Customs and Border Protection agents, and they can keep arresting people and referring them to the immigration court, but unless we're willing to match an immigration judge for every Customs and Border Protection agent, that deportation backlog is just going to grow. And we're never going to be able to process those cases, let alone the asylum cases that we have a legal obligation to process. We want to prevent a future undocumented population, make sure everyone has a lawful way to apply for a work visa to come to the United States, outside of the United States. That means it has to be decoupled from specific employers. Someone should be able to walk into a U.S. consulate and say, hey, I would like to pay an application fee and make an application for a 3-year work permit in the United States. Be fingerprinted, and if the Department of Labor determines that so many 3-year work permits can be issued for the next 3 years, and that person's name comes up, they've already been background checked, interviewed, call them in, issue them the work visa for 3 years to come in. You decouple it from employers because worker exploitation is still a huge problem in this country. We still have human trafficking in the United States of America. It happens every single day, and it happens in Illinois. So if we want to stop human trafficking, especially from people bringing in non-U.S. citizens from outside, we have to give people a lawful process to follow. Then they're less likely to be exploited and trafficked. We need to increase the family and employment visa numbers to clear out the existing lines. We got to clear out those backlogs. People have been waiting in excess of 15 years. So let's clear them out, and then we can move forward. And we need to effectively fund humanitarian aid and support diplomacy. If we do not want asylum seekers at our border, then we have to uphold our obligation to help make their country stable. Asylum seekers don't decide on a whim to walk 800 to 1,000 miles, dragging their children, risking murder and sexual assault on a whim. That's not why they do it. Asylum seekers are forced out of their homes. They'd be happy to stay in their country if it were safe for them to do so. We already have lots of articles have come out about people that we have deported back who were then killed as soon as they were deported because their asylum claims are not being heard effectively. So we can do better. If we want to keep people from coming to our borders without permission, we just need effective laws and effective administrators. It's not an emergency. It's incompetency. All right. So nobody should be afraid. We have a lot more control than we think. We can control what we become in this country. That's why America is great. That's why America is great. Always take a breath and remind yourself that we are a very strong country. We have made some grave mistakes in the past and committed grave injustices at many levels. But we are a strong country and we are a good country and we are capable of doing the right thing, and we have proven that. Stick to the goals, stick to the broad areas of agreement. You're right, there should be no illegals in the United States. What can we do about that? It's not about deporting them all, it's providing a lawful process for everyone to follow. We need to secure our borders. We have the absolute right to control our borders. You are correct. How can we do that? You can just start the conversation. Know who your local, state, and federal elected representatives are and call them. States are not allowed to legislate in the immigration arena. They can't give anyone legal status. They can do some things that are not prohibited by federal law. For example, the state of Illinois passed the Trust Act, which prohibits the Department of Homeland Security from co-opting our state and local police into enforcing civil immigration law. Our police are there for criminal law enforcement, not civil law enforcement. So state law prohibits that. So a local police officer has no business asking anyone what their immigration status is. If ICE wants to come in and do their job, ICE can come in and do their job. They have their own federal budget. They don't need to use state and local police to do their job for them. Your county sheriff, though, here in Stevenson County, does not seem to agree with the Trust Act and is routinely detaining immigrants in that jail who are arrested on minor offenses, such as driving on a suspended license or no license. ICE is asking your county sheriff here to hold them on ICE detainers, which are unlawful and prohibited under state law, but he's doing it anyway. Ask your U.S. Rep to co-sponsor H.R. 6, that is the Dream and Promise Act of 2019, that would allow DACAs a way to actually apply for lawful status. It's a great bill. We need comprehensive reform, but at the very least, we should get this done for the DACAs, because that DACA is going to end at some point. Talk to your U.S. Rep about advocating for comprehensive immigration reform. Sherry Bustos, she votes absolutely the right way. Absolutely she does. But she is not using her voice to take a leadership position on immigration. She's a very powerful U.S. Rep. She should be using her voice more for this. Some of those 32,000 DACAs live in the 17th Congressional District. They need more advocates. Write a letter to the editor. Join the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICIRR.org. They're a phenomenal organization. Anything good that happens for immigration in the state of Illinois is due directly to ICIRR's work. Run for office, state, local, state, or federal. We need just more regular, reasonable people getting elected who are willing to sit down, look at what a problem is, and discuss a solution to the actual problem. So don't sell yourself short. Run for office. We need more people running. My name is Sara Dady. Thank you very much for listening.